Hello everyone, and as always, welcome back to another Mortal Kombat 1 video. With us having settled into that of the new era, as well as having covered the missing and mentioned characters, it's now naturally brought us onto the question of who should return, and how could they be implemented into this very new and very different timeline. Because with the new leadership, alterations, and changes we've seen, it now opens up a really wide and what I would say is a very broad canvas for the series, as it gives us the ability to rewrite characters and take them in a completely different direction from before. It's pretty beneficial in some ways, as it allows us to explore them in very different scenarios that may flourish some really old previous existing ideas. Now, I do wish to preface and say I will be strictly focusing on characters mentioned in the game, not officially featured in it. Whilst I could easily touch on the characters that feature in the cameo roster, it just kind of feels like low-hanging fruit, especially seeing as some actually already feature in the game's story mode. So I will only be touching on characters mentioned in game, what we know of them, and what direction do I think they should take. And there will be a heavy emphasis and focus, who I will say are the strongest contenders for DLC or the next big installment. As there has of course been tons of foreshadowing for what's coming next with Havoc, as well as that of Onaga. Plus, I will state that there will be more of a heavy emphasis on the fantastical side of the mythos. Just kind of due to how Mortal Kombat 1 has laid out its story, it's far more focused on that element than what we got in MKX and 11, which was kind of told from the Special Forces perspective. Thus, I will be looking on that side of the spectrum instead of that of the Special Forces. Plus, a lot of them have already been relegated to that of the cameo roster, so I won't really be touching on them here. But before we do begin this somewhat list and breakdown, if you like what we do here and wish to see more, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does go a long way here, as it does support the video and the channel in the algorithm. Anywho, let's dive into things. Now, the first character I want to touch on was one actually referenced to very early on in the game's life, as you would be name dropped throughout the betas, and that is Countess Jade. And this is a very interesting and what I would say is a very refreshing take on the character. Jade has always kind of suffered because of this, as she is just largely looked at as Kitana's friend. She's always struggled to have her own sense of identity, and even in Mortal Kombat Deception, where she was somewhat freed of those restraints, as Kitana was dead at the time, she did kind of play second fiddle to that of Sindel, as her main purpose was assisting her in reviving Kitana. So Jade's always kind of suffered this fate, even when the continuity was rebooted in MK9, as she still continued to play that friend character in both 9 and 11. My point is that her somewhat shackles to that of Kitana has always kind of limited her to that of a guardian-like role. Thus, with her being bumped up to that of Countess, she's now an extremely important figurehead in Outworld, being part of its royal court, and someone with a sense of power in the universe. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to re-establish the character and give her a new sense of identity and a way for people to learn who exactly is this Jade. Whilst, yes, in comparison to that of Kitana and Mileena, she isn't in as quite a high role as them, it does at least break her away from the bonds of Kitana to allow her to stand on her own two legs. Because in some ways, as a countess, she could actually be seen on an even level with Kitana, as she no longer seeks the crown in this timeline, and instead acts as Outworld's general. So, with all of this accounted for and everything in mind, what could they do with Jade here? Well, there's a very interesting avenue that I think they should definitely take with her character. One which ties her to that of the royal line, but in a really interesting way. As one of the lingering plot threads that have been purposely left open here is the corruption and deceit amongst Outworld's high table. For those unaware in the game's aftermath, through arcade ladder endings, we learn that there are particular figureheads amongst the royal court, as well as that of the Umgadi, who have been secretly playing their hand in the royal line's demise, with the most infamous, of course, being King Jared. I think this sets up the perfect opportunity here for her reintroduction, as she could be the one tracking down those figureheads and purging them from this circle. You could also play off the old interesting dynamic and rivalry that she once had with Tanya, especially with her as leader of the Umgadi. You could have it so Jade is very much so innocent here, searching for these figureheads to prove her loyalty, whilst Tanya herself doesn't at all trust her. It repaints their dynamic in a very interesting way, while simultaneously modernizing it for that of the new era. If you really want to drive the knife in and go even deeper, adding an extra layer and elements to this, you could always bring Jade's mother into the mix. A throwaway character foreshadowed in 9, and then of course introduced in that of 11. You could actually write it and have it so it was her mother who perpetrated all of this, possibly looking to overthrow the Edenian court, and selfishly thrust herself and her daughter into the role of Empress and Princess. It creates a really interesting dynamic amongst the overall court, as well as expand on Jade's mother that paints Jade herself as this tragic figure, one torn between her mother's selfish wish for power and then her own dedication and love for that of the royal line. I really think this gives her her own sense of individuality, whilst adding more to her than just being Kitana's friend. Now moving along, we do have a character that I kind of feel needs to be redeemed, and that is of course Kotal Khan. A character that I can only really dub as the punching bag of the reboot trilogy. Kotal is ultimately what I would say is an extremely conflicted character within the canon, as he has a great design and is conceptually awesome, but man does he get his ass beat a lot. And it didn't help that during the time of his introduction, he was Khan, a title that does hold a lot of weight here. So to many, his frequent losses really did feel like he sullied that role. I mean, in what game do you get your ass beat by your own girlfriend, then you get baned and then decapitated? This poor man is in dire need of being re-established here. And I do think there's a really interesting way of interjecting him back to the canon. You see, Kotal's always kind of flip-flopped on the grey line between good and bad here. Whilst I don't think you need to make him outright super evil, I think making Kotal a general in Shao's army is the perfect window of opportunity to reintroduce him here, as we do know that he does exist in the new era. And with Reiko having been set up to perish by the end of MK1, Kotal could actually be slotted in here as Shao's second in command. But if you still want to have that somewhat defiant figure against Shao, you could always have Kotal be the somewhat moral voice of reason to Shao's brutality. Because seeing as how the former general is going to some pretty dangerous extremes to obtain Outworld, it could in fact cause a lot of strife amongst his own army here. Because just how far is too far before his forces break? Keep in mind that in the aftermath of the game, not only does Shao seek to control Onaga, but he's even actively looking to enslave the Kaitin, one of the most dangerous races in all of Outworld. So you could get a very interesting contrast between the two. Whilst yes, I could suggest having Kotal replace Shao, I think it's far more compelling and complementary to his character to see and show how the dreams of ambition can very quickly turn into that of a nightmare, as Shao's drive for conquest can very quickly blind him of the actual damage he is doing here. Kotal could act as that moral compass to his character, because for a long time, characters like Reiko enabled Shao. They encouraged his madness, whereas now you have someone that challenges Shao's ideals, and whether or not what he's doing is actually for the best of Outworld, and not simply a way to inflate his ego. I think it does a lot for Kotal, especially after being a bit of a training dummy. So we aren't really putting him in a high position of power here, but we are putting him in a position where he can learn from the very best about what it is to be a general, not so much that of a Khan. Now, our next character, and definitely someone I've been advocating for, especially in the fall of Saido, is the Sidon General Hotaru. This is a very interesting character to tackle, as so much has been robbed of him in the aftermath of Mortal Kombat 1. With his homeworld in ruins, it opens up a lot of possibilities for him. And with the relocation of the Sidons to Outworld, with him presumably as their leader, what can be done with Hotaru here? Well, with Rain currently imprisoned, as it was he that flooded their home, I could only imagine the hatred and spite that Hotaru holds against him, wanting to seek retribution for his people, and I could see this having him directly collide with the royal court. Because, you see, in Sidon culture, the punishment for crimes are extremely cruel, no matter how minor they are. Shigenko was a perfect example of this, as he was incarcerated for decades for breaking curfew. So with Rain responsible for mass genocide, only to then be locked away, I could definitely see him taking the law into his own hands, as his punishment definitely doesn't fit for crime. So it would be very interesting to watch this goodwill deteriorate, as it forces the Sidons to battle the royal court on their home turf, as they maybe see Melina's role as Empress as weak. This could very well in turn also have him forge an alliance with Shao, something we have seen Hotaru do in the past, as he did align himself with Onaga, believing that his rule would create true order. So it kind of creates this very interesting subplot in the fall of the Order Realm. But this is all under the assumption that nothing happens to Rain in the DLC, someone who's very clearly been set up on a path of redemption. Now my final character, and one that I do feel quite strongly on, the Fire Elemental Blaze. And this is a character I really do feel has been underappreciated, despite his significance to that of the narrative, as he's been an elusive figure since MK2, and didn't really gain any narrative significance until Deadly Alliance and then Armageddon. It's here where it's revealed that his fate is directly tied to that of the Edenian demigods, Taven and Dagon, created by their parents, Delia and Argus, as a somewhat failsafe should combat transcend that of the tournament. So whomever would defeat the Fire Elemental would gain his godlike power and usher in a new age for the series. Originally, it was prophesied to be Taven or Dagon, but at the start of MK9, we see that it is Shao that wins, transcending to that of divinity and bringing that timeline to an end. In this new era, however, much has changed, and with the tournament format no longer being one of bloodshed, nor Taven or Dagon existing, Blaze is given a lot of freedom and no longer limited to that of an expendable being. So now it leads to the question of why Blaze of all characters? Well, 17 years absence aside, I do think that Blaze is a really good gateway character to learn the new age of gods in Mortal Kombat 1, with Liu Kang having relinquished his title of Titan. We know that in this new timeline, there's a completely new entourage of elder gods and gods, ones who are nameless but have been foreshadowed in-game. Blaze could actually serve as an emissary for them, kind of like how Scorpion served as their champion back in the original timeline. And it does make a lot of sense for him here, as he is essentially a golem forged by the gods. Blaze could really serve as a very interesting story piece that helps us learn of the new gods, whilst maybe adding a bit more character to that of Delia and Argus. Plus, with Outworld being set up as the next big battlefield, as Onaga is going to be unleashed, it would make sense for the gods to interfere. It does actually set up a possibility of us finally seeing a fight between Blaze and Onaga, something never explored before, but something I'd love to see. So with that said everyone, this kind of covers all of my options and ideas. Keep in mind, I strictly limited myself here to kind of keep in line with the universe, as well as that of its current themes, storylines, and directions. So, with that said, and everything noted here, I now wish to relay that question to all of you. Who would you like to see return in the new era? And how would you yourself like to see them be written? Please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say. And keep in mind, you don't have to stick to my limitations and restrictions. But for now everyone, that's been it for me. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.